Welcome everyone to our session today, which is titled Living in Recovery with Eating Disorders. And today we'll be hearing sharings from Yen and Bea, who are our wonderful ambassadors for Mind. I'm really excited to be here to facilitate this discussion. I'm Steph. I'm a PhD student with Mind Hong Kong and HKU, and I'm currently exploring in my dissertation how our narratives and stories shape the ways that we understand and how we view mental illness and health in our community. So very excited to be here today. So before we begin, I would like to ask everyone to fill out the pre-survey, which will there will be a link in the chat that Vicky will share. And in this survey, this will just ask you a little bit about your attitudes towards mental health stigma or understandings of mental health stigma. And just this will really help us improve our program and understand what the issues are in the Hong Kong context. So please take a look at the chat and fill it out as we are going through our introductions for this session. And before we begin, I also wanted to note that mental health issues are not easy to deal with and can be very complex, and also at times can bring up difficult feelings. So just letting you know that before you listen to the stories we share today. But as difficult as these issues are and topics are, we definitely feel that it is a conversation worth having. So if you ever need to take care of yourself and pause during the session, feel free to do that at any time. And for anyone out there who is currently struggling, please know that you are definitely not alone. Today, we're here to share stories and really show you and demonstrate that we all go through these struggles. So please seek help as you need and know that recovery is very possible, which you'll also hear from our ambassadors today. So let's get going with it. With that, let's get going. So let's start with Yen. And Yen, would you please share your mental health story in brief terms, and then we'll go deeper into it as our discussion progresses.
Yes, of course. Hi, guys. My name is Yen. And as I said in my morning session, in case you weren't there, I am 32 years old this year. And I guess starting in my mid to late teens, when I was 16, I started developing like eating disorders. I first experienced anorexia when I took a gap year after high school before college. And then, from that, it progressed into bulimia, which would be, so anorexia, for those who might not be familiar, is like restricting your food intake. And that, caused a lot of weight loss. And then eventually my body just rebelled and I started binge eating. It was almost like my body naturally by reflex telling me that, you're undernourished, you need to eat, right? So it was like overnight, my body flipped a switch. I was engaging in uncontrollable binges, which freaked me out because in my mind, I was still in a very restrictive and like over-exercising kind of mentality, and it became a vicious cycle. With that, depression set in because I was seemingly always fighting a battle against myself, so on one hand, it's like this compulsion to binge. On another hand, it was this, voice in my head that told me like what I was doing was terrible, I was a failure, so all these voices just got me so exhausted. I looked towards the future and I was like, is a life like that even worth living? And that depression and the accompanying like suicidal thoughts led me to seek help. And finally, I was partially hospitalized in the US, and then I came back to Hong Kong eventually and continued treatment here. So yeah, that's my story in a nutshell.
Thanks for sharing that, Yen, and we'll definitely dig deeper into those experiences later on. But before we do that, let's move along to hear Bea's story in brief as well.
Thanks for the introduction, Steph. So hi, I'm Bea. Thanks for tuning in to listen to us today. I wanted to introduce myself on another level beyond the eating disorder, because when we're asked to introduce ourselves personally, we're often asked where we're from, where's home, which is hard for me to answer because I lived in New Zealand for 11 years, the UK 11 years, Hong Kong 8 years. Fun fact for you, I lived in 5 cities in 5 years. My mom's Russian, my dad's English and Bulgarian. They live in Scotland, diverse family. And then when we're asked to introduce ourselves for work, we list all our duties. Like I can say I'm a psych graduate, an English teacher, line manager. I coordinate a volunteer program for teaching refugees. And I'm also a mental health first aider at my work and run monthly wellness workshops. What I wish people in our society could say without fear of stigma and judgment is something which I can proudly say today, and Yen, which is that we recovered from an eating disorder. And for me, it also started as anorexia for the first few months when I was 15, and also swung the other way into binge eating, which I did every single day for 5 years, and then 5 years on and off. Whilst there is a third of my life, which is significant, it's only one part of my life. And I'm really happy to say I've been in recovery for the past 6 years. I do want to say recovering from an eating disorder is a complicated process, as you first have to address your symptoms and find other coping strategies for your triggers, instead of going back to disordered eating and exercise behaviors. But then you also have to address all the underlying things that led to having the eating disorder in the first place and all the after effects it causes. So every year I've focused on making progress in a different area, whether that's addressing my self-esteem, my confidence, my concentration and attention span, ongoing joint pain as a result of exercising too hard, too often, how I respond to stress, how I deal with relationships and communicate with others, and also my sleep. I'm really lucky I've had great support systems amongst family, friends, colleagues, and professionals in different areas. And thanks to trying a range of treatment methods, I'm able to live a much happier and healthier life. And by sharing my story with you today, which is the first time I'm doing it in such a public space, I really want to convey a message of hope and emphasize that recovery is absolutely possible. And whether that's for someone out there listening or someone you know, we can get there. It really just takes some time and the right support. And I think that overcoming a mental health struggle is one of the greatest achievements a person can have, and a beautiful blessing. And it's something to be celebrated and embraced. And I'm really happy that I've been invited here to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you, Yen and Bea, for those wonderful introductions. And I think it really sets the stage nicely for our discussion today, because I think the main message that I hear from both of you is that even though mental illness and your experiences with an eating disorder, neither of them, neither of your stories were linear or easy to get through. But recovery is possible, and you were able to move through it in an evolving process and move through those challenges. So I am really inspired by that, and I think it's very hope-giving to hear those introductions. Thank you so much to you both for being here. So let's get into some of the questions that we've taken from the public. They have asked some questions in order to help them learn a little bit more about living in recovery from an eating disorder. So I'd like to go through those questions and hear your thoughts as well. So when did you both realize that something was wrong or something was not quite right in your life and that you needed to seek professional help for some of the symptoms that you were experiencing? So first off, I'll bring it on over to Bea to hear a little bit of her thoughts and then pass it on over to Yen.
So when I had anorexia in my mid-teens, I did know at the back of my mind I was ill. Like, I could see my clothes fitting differently. I was losing weight. I felt cold. I did know something wasn't right. But I think at that age and at that time, I felt really helpless. And my mom was away. She was working overseas for a few months. When she came back, she saw how much weight I dropped, and I told her I lost my period. So she took me straight to the doctor. I remember being in the doctor's office, like standing on the weighing scale and seeing like how thin I was compared to before, and like still thinking I had weight to lose. But then the doctor said if I didn't try to get my periods back, I might risk being infertile later. Somehow that was a switch that woke me up to needing to eat more. But because my body was so starved and I had lost my hunger and fullness cues, it swung the other way into binge eating. And compensating in other ways, for example, skipping meals, over-exercising, pushing too hard in the gym, and taking diet pills and supplements. So because it was getting quite serious, we initially went to the NHS in the UK, but I remember the doctor there laughing at me when I was surprised at how long the waiting list was. It was 6 months to a year, and he said, "Ha ha, what do you think it would be?" Which is not really funny at all. And then we tried different therapists. I remember one used to make tea for himself during our session time, not really taking it too seriously. Another one, the first time we went to see him, he said, the solution to your issues is your parents should get divorced and you should move out, which as a 16, 17-year-old isn't really a great solution at all. I did have one good therapist at that time in Scotland, but he kind of got frustrated with me that rationally, I was understanding what he was saying, but behaviorally, I wasn't changing. So I didn't really know how I could go to university in that state, which led me to trying antidepressants for my first 2 years, which was something I was reluctant to go on because I didn't want to rely on them. And I didn't really want that as a solution because I knew that like the causes were quite complex. But I did take that medication. It did help stabilize my eating. However, medication usually has side effects. So I felt quite tired. I had to skip some lectures as a result. So the third year of my degree was a work placement. And I thought, how can I go on like this? And I was lucky that my partner at the time, well, lucky and unlucky, he was also coming off antidepressants. And so we kind of came off them together during that year, and that year was okay. But then in my fourth year, my final year, we split up. And again, that kind of like destabilized my eating, as well as the following year when I moved to Hong Kong, it really exacerbated. Luckily in Hong Kong, I did find really good help. So it started off with someone in my old workplace. My boss recommended someone that another colleague had tried, and I've stuck with that same counselor like throughout all these years. She's seen me throughout all my progress. Now I only just talk to her to like check in and let her know that I'm doing well. So that's pretty cool. I also got to know different fitness professionals who were very holistic. Like they really emphasize the process of exercising and eating well, and emphasize like your health and performance over numbers and outcome, which can be really arbitrary and rigid. And also I have seen nutritionists both in the UK and in Hong Kong. Again, that kind of helped me to overcome like my strict food rules, because I remember I used to have an A4 list of foods that I wouldn't touch. And yeah, like now I can eat anything. I don't really think about it. And they kind of got me to really know the importance of having structure and routine, like not to skip meals and like have a balanced diet and so on. As a result of all this, like I really practice like mindful or intuitive eating and exercise. Like I really follow what my body tells me. Like I let my body give me the cues. I really respect like what it tells me, and I don't want to force it through things. And that means I can't compare myself to what others eat, how they exercise. And that's okay for me because I found what works for me. And so now I can enjoy eating and exercise without any association of guilt or punishment like I used to, without constantly overthinking about those things. I feel free to enjoy my life and experience it fully. So for me, recovery has been a real blessing.
Gotcha. Well, okay. So for my, how I realized I needed to seek help, a little bit of background information. So I've always been generally quite an anxious and highly strung person, I guess ever since my school days, right? So I went to a local school in Hong Kong. So I was born and raised here. I went through the local school system, and you know how it's very grade, academic, achievement-oriented education system. And I think for me, being slightly anxious, like school grades was a great way for me to exert control over my life, you know? So it was something that was tangible, quantifiable, controllable. If I studied hard, I'd get good grades, and I wouldn't really have to think of, you know, like uncertainties in life, or, you know, during teenage years, like, you know, what sort of person do I want to be? Like all these existential questions, right? Like I could be distracted from them by just fixating on something tangible like school. And because of that, I was a really good student. I was obsessed with getting perfect grades, being an overachiever. And when it came to graduation, I graduated a bit young from high school. So my parents told me to take a gap year, essentially to chill out before college. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. So I was 16 then, and I went to rural China to teach English in a rural village. And that was the first time that I didn't have a routine or goal of like school and exams and something to work towards, right? I had so much free time. And not just that, it was the first time I was living away from home. And obviously rural China is very different from the modern urban city comforts of Hong Kong. And I think that uncertainty and that unfamiliarity like triggered me again. And instead of fixating on school grades, I began to fixate on something else that was easy to control and tangible, which was food and exercise, right? So that's how I got into this slippery slope of an eating disorder. I remember so clearly when I first started off, like I did not want to lose weight. That was never my goal. It was more just, oh, you know, I'm in a new place. I kind of want to be healthy, whatever healthy meant, you know. So I was like reading some magazines. I was like, oh, healthy is, you know, like certain kind of foods. Oh, healthy is hitting certain exercise goals. And so I tried adopting that, but then soon my, you know, that personality type of mine where it was like, keep driving, ended up making these goals more and more extreme, more and more specific. And so that was, you know, when I first came into contact with anorexia. And, you know, with anorexia, I had it for about half a year. I realized like physically there were lots of symptoms that, you know, you guys might be familiar with, you know, anorexics who tend to be, you know, below what is normal and healthy for in terms of body weight. My hair was thinning. I was so ashamed of like how bony my body structure was. I was painfully self-conscious physically, and emotionally, I was also like hypersensitive to, you know, comments that people would make. I was dreading my own birthday because that meant I had to eat cake. And, you know, I secretly knew this wasn't normal. Like it was like affecting every aspect of my life, you know, and it was affecting my relationships, but I didn't want to change. You know, at that time, I thought this discipline made me feel so powerful, right? So I was like, this is great. I feel empowered. I'm in control, right? So I didn't want help, even though my family was very worried. Like B, I lost my period. I was brought to the doctor. They thought it was other problems. And then, as I said in my introduction, like one day my body just flipped a switch and I started binge eating, right? It's like your body's response to months and months of like undernourishment. And then it became a vicious cycle. So I continued trying to restrict food, over-exercise, but then I binge uncontrollably. And at this point, 99% of my thoughts throughout the day was revolving around how to get food, how to avoid food. I was socially withdrawn. I didn't want to see friends, family. I missed important weddings. I missed meals. And, you know, that's when depression set in. And I remember looking at my future life and being like, this is exhausting. Like a life like that is not worth living. You know, how will I ever have a family? How can I ever have a husband or children if I continue being like this, right? Like, you know, I would never be able to throw birthday parties for my children because I'll finish their cake before their party. Like, you know, it was obsessive. And that's when I realized, you know what, I need help. If not, like, I just can't get out of this by myself. So that's the turning point when I realized, you know, I need to save me from myself. Yeah.
Thank you, Bea and Yen, for sharing those thoughts and your experiences. I think something that was that I really noted was, you know, you just talked about how eating disorders are such complex conditions that really do stem from biological, psychological, and social factors all coming together. They don't just stem from one thing. They really do have to, you know, I think of it like the perfect storm coming together and then resulting in something that can be, can influence many aspects of your life, different realms of your life. And, you know, I think just thinking about also how you described the ways that it's not about food at all. It's a lot about establishing a sense of control during times that are very unstable or difficult to experience or to overcome, and using food as a way to establish that sense of control. So I really appreciated both of you emphasizing that point and really shining a light on the fact that eating disorders are much more complex than many times, you know, many times we don't appreciate how complex these conditions are in the ways that they're formed and also how they impact our lives. So yeah, let's move along into our next question. I would like to know what you think loved ones can do to support people who are experiencing eating disorders right now, and also what you have done to support yourself, because also from your narratives just now, it's a combination of you realizing that you need support as well as recruiting help from other people who can support you. So please do share. Let's go with Yen first. Please share your thoughts.
So I have a lot of experience with this because
go for it.
Coming from a like traditional Chinese family, like for example, some of my family members, they lived through the war, like World War II, right? And to them at that time, food was something that was rationed, right? Like there was not enough food to go around. So for me to be like, I just cannot bring myself to eat, they were just like, what is going on? And they could not understand, right? And so for me, like I realized the first thing, if you're a loved one supporting someone who's struggling with eating issues, is be kind. Like try not to judge, although I know it's very difficult. Please try not to make comments like, oh, it's just food. Like, why are you being so irrational? Or like, why are you so selfish? Why are you putting your family through this stress, right? Like, know that for the majority of us that want to seek help, we are really struggling against ourselves, and we're fighting a battle against ourselves every day. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Part of us knows it's irrational, but then Mr. Hyde comes out in our mind and says, yes, but it will serve you well. So it's a constant struggle. So please be kind. On the same note, like please also be patient. Don't force recovery on us, of course, unless medically necessary, because unless we ourselves want to change, we will put up the strongest fight, right? And so what you can do as a loved one is just be there when the day comes that we realize we need help, right? And we can't do it on our own. For me, like I really needed someone to be there for me almost like 24/7, right? So at that time I lived with an ex-boyfriend, and if I had a binge urge, I would, even in the middle of the night, right, I would wake him up and he would just hug me. He would force me to tell him how I'm feeling, and he just gently keep me company until the urge passes, right? So to have someone, it just needs one person to be there for you in your time of need, right? So if you can be that person for your loved one, that makes a world of difference, more so than, of course, like professional help, but that emotional support from like a loved one. And please, like also don't get tired of me asking the same seemingly irrational questions. Like I tend to always ask my loved ones, like, is it okay if I gain weight? Will you still love me if I become a bit softer around the edges? And rationally, I know, like, of course it's okay for me to gain weight. It's fine, right? But it's just this voice in my head, the Mr. Hyde voice, the eating disorder voice that is trying to challenge it. And I need reassurance often, right? And so, please be like my broken record. No matter how many times I ask you, please don't be like, oh, I've answered that already. It's like, know that like, it really means a lot to me, your answer, right? And if you are worried, like you can recommend like body positive influencers or eating disorder recovery blogs to let us know we're not alone. You could be like, try to be a good role model for us, because for me, let's say when I was in the throes of my eating disorder, I've completely forgotten what it means to have a healthy and normal, balanced relationship with food and exercise. So it really would help us if you help us relearn the basics. We forget what it means to feel hungry, like, right? And of course, like one thing that is also quite key is try your best to avoid body and food related comments. There's sometimes like in a modern society, it's so easy to say things like, oh girl, like, tell me how you lost your weight. I'm so envious of your discipline, or I'm going to be good and order a salad. Like these seemingly like harmless comments can actually fester in the minds of someone who is going through an eating disorder, right? And, if you do have your own struggles with food and exercise, please be understanding if just for the time being, we need to keep a bit of a distance so that we can work on ourselves and come back stronger with and for you, So these are some things that I found really helped from a loved one in helping me. Yeah. And B, maybe you could talk more about, what things you did that, would help with your own processing of these issues.
Yeah, I definitely really resonate with the broken record that you said, because we are sensitive, we are overthinking, we just want that reassurance, we just want to talk and like someone to listen to us, like no matter what it is that we're going to say. And my mom just joined the call, which is perfect timing, because I want to say, yeah, she was fantastic at this and was like pivotal in my recovery. Like anytime I needed someone to talk to, she was there. yeah, to this day, I can just go to her. I know she's going to listen without judgment. And that's the biggest thing you can do for anyone going through any mental health condition. Speaking of the home, I think helping us to avoid those triggers at home, no matter how strange they may seem, how much you don't understand them, like they might seem bizarre requests, but just respect our need for this help. Like maybe that's hiding our trigger foods or something like that. But like trust, we know what works and doesn't work for us. So just trying to help us with that can make it a little bit easier. And being patient with us when we go to restaurants or when cooking, because again, we're probably thinking a lot about it. We might be asking a lot of questions, might be Googling things still, because the habit change does take time since you face food and exercise every day. And I have to say, like, I was lucky that my long-term partner in Hong Kong was fantastic at this, just being very patient and understanding that it was a process, it was going to take some time. I definitely agree about commenting on not commenting on the food and exercise and not adding morals and emotions to food, calling them good or bad. Because again, that can just exacerbate the emotions that we may be experiencing when we're eating or exercising. And so similar to that, kind of complement our personality and our presence and our progress and all these other things beyond the eating disorder, like positive reinforcement of all the things that we didn't even realize might be important, because our eating disorder just convinces us that, you know, it's what we look like, what we eat, what we exercise, all those numbers, that they're convincing us that that's important, but there's so much more to life and so much more to us. And so if you can emphasize that, that's extremely helpful. And yeah, just being open and willing to listen, like non-judgmental. I remember moving to Hong Kong, I wasn't really sure about telling people. I haven't always had the best response, but I'm really lucky in my current workplace, people are supportive. And so I remember telling some colleagues, managers, and friends about my past experiences, and they were like, oh, okay, you went through that. Like, what was that like? And they didn't really react as if it was a big deal. And that was so helpful. Not saying things like, I've binged too, because one, you probably haven't, but two, saying that takes away from what we're going through, and comments like that can make us shut down. Like, as well as saying like, oh, it's no big deal, you'll be fine, like, don't worry, things get better. You know, this is something we're battling with on a constant basis. So I kind of feel like just let us talk and open up about our own experience, and asking questions can help us do that. Try and understand what it's like for us as individuals. But while those are all things other people can do, I found it really important to find things that I can do myself. And kind of what has helped me like have a framework for this is something I learned from the psychologist in Hong Kong, Adrian Lowe. I went to a well-being in the workplace webinar, and he introduced this well-being donut analogy, where in the middle would be things that trigger you. And then in the next layer are things that you can do for yourself. And in the outer layer, it'll be things that other people can do. And you can link triggers to something specific. So yeah, you have a strategy to fall back on if something ever happens. And what I also found helpful was including those things I can do for myself as part of a routine. So it's not just a curative measure, but it's also preventative. So for example, if I feel overwhelmed, the automatic way, like for me to feel better, is go for a walk, like go by the harbor, put my music in, I can people watch. Sometimes I write haiku now or take pictures, like just something that can direct my energy in another way. For me, I do also like to have a balanced exercise routine. So it's not just going to the gym, it's also going hiking, it's doing yoga. And yoga has been really important, or any kind of like meditation exercise, like where I can just slow down, like calm down my mind. That's been super important. And I'm going to be talking in the next session, if you're joining, about art for wellness. That's been super helpful. And yeah, one of the best things that I've ever tried in my recovery. So yeah, maybe see you in the next session.
I think, you know, to add on to Bea's point, in terms of like exercise, right, like hiking and yoga, I think it's very important that, you know, we think of exercise not just in terms of, like, say, a numbers goal, right, but to really appreciate it as like movement for our body. Like, what can our bodies do for us, right? Or let's say, instead of, you know, I know how goal setting can be very motivating in terms of like exercise, you know, like, oh, I want to run, I don't know, 10K or something. But instead of like a goal like that, maybe it could be more like, you know, how does my body feel, you know, by let's say lifting the same amount of weight, maybe I'm a bit less out of breath. Or maybe instead of doing a few reps, I can do more reps, so these more strength-based like measurements of your strength and like feeling proud of what your body can accomplish for you. It's like, wow, like my thighs let me like carry me up through the mountain in my hikes, rather than, oh, it slims this part of my body, it burns fat off this part of my body. Like that's a good way to also like try to retrain your thinking into appreciating the true benefits of exercise without feeding like your potential eating disorder.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Especially someone who's gone through injury, and your body is actually amazing. It gives you those cues of like when to slow down, like when to take a rest, when not to push yourself so hard. And I think like that's helped me like have a more positive relationship with my body, and as well, like you said, like having those amazing hikes and then experiencing life in a different way, like not associating exercise with the outcome, but it's more about the holistic process, and really like slowing down and being in tune with yourself. Like your body really knows the answers. You just got to trust it and be its friend.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I love that last little bit where we were talking about, just revising and revisiting our relationship with food and exercise. I know we were talking about earlier in terms of how food and exercise became a way of establishing control in, both your storylines. And I also think that what you were talking about just now really shows how you can also use those realms of food and exercise in recovery to kind of practice the skills that you want to have in recovery, such as, being able to appreciate your body for what it can do, looking at those more, the broader aspects of what the body does for you on a daily basis, and enjoying foods in different ways as well. So I love how it's like you're taking those two realms again, but then reclaiming those spaces for yourself. So thank you both for sharing those coping strategies, as well as just also sharing ideas for how loved ones can support someone who is experiencing an eating disorder or body image and food concerns right now. I think something that I was stuck in my head was I like definitely think the broken record strategy, and how it is sometimes frustrating or difficult to understand what someone with an eating disorder is going through. But I think both of you really spoke to the idea of how we don't have to fully understand someone's struggles, or even understand, what the person has gone through. It's more just about being there and giving the person a non-judgmental and safe space to open up, to feel acknowledged beyond what they've experienced, to see them as a person. So I think both of you really spoke very beautifully to those points. Thank you very much. And I think that is going to bring us to our next question, which is, we're going to do some myth busting, smash those myths surrounding eating disorders. So I'd like to hear from both of you what some things are you think that people don't understand about eating disorders. So let's go with Bea first. Please share your thoughts.
So firstly, I want to start off with understanding that health has a lot of gray areas and it's very individual. So what may be healthy or unhealthy for me or another person may be unhealthy or healthy for another. So for example, athletes, they have a strict training regime, maybe they have to follow a certain diet to help their performance. But for me, I could not do that. That is not something I want to go through, but they can manage it maybe in their own way. But similarly, what I do and what I find easy to do now, that might be too much for somebody else. So I think we really have to avoid having cookie cutter approaches and saying that, okay, this is the right thing to do in terms of eating and exercise. It really is so individual, and it really is on a spectrum. Because before I even had this eating disorder, when I first went to the gym, it was just to be healthy and exercise with friends. It was a very fine line that I slipped over into obsession and then, this overtaking my life. So I think just emphasizing that it's very individual and unique to that person, and people should learn to what works for them and find out what's best for them. So on that note, in terms of diagnostics from the doctor, again, that can be very rigid, because for a lot of them, you have to be very underweight or overweight to get diagnosed as ill, but this isn't something you're going to see. And I experienced that where, I was overeating on healthy foods sometimes, and I was regularly exercising. So when my weight fluctuated up and down, it was within a healthy range. So I remember some people saying, you look fine, like you're not ill, like you look great. In fact, like praising my dedication, going to the gym. And it's like, no, like what I've done to get here is not healthy. And what I'm going through is really difficult. And so just understanding that, yeah, it's not something you can see, and it's very unique to that individual. So similarly, I think we shouldn't judge or label a person just based on snippets of what we see from their personality and behaviors. We don't do that in a physical sense. Like if someone wears glasses, we don't always call them that person with glasses. So why do we need to say that someone is like depressed or is anorexic or has an eating disorder? Like that's just one part of their life. And I just think, like, I know there is still that stigma. I really hope we can break it, because when we have stomach ache or, headaches, we find out the cause and we get it treated and we go to the doctor. So if we get injured, it's the same, we go to see a physio. So I think it should absolutely be the same for when we get help for eating disorders or other mental conditions. So just seek the right help. Don't be afraid to talk about it, but also realize that these things are temporary, and with the right adjustments like glasses, or in some cases it might be medication or a different kind of treatment, you can get better and you're not stuck with this for life. And yeah, I think people might think that it's a permanent thing, especially because it's so hard to break those eating disordered habits or disordered exercise behaviors. But yeah, I think absolutely you can get better, and we just really need to emphasize that.
Some other myths that I would add to that is, where do I start? One of them is, eating disorders is just an intense diet, and it's just girls who want to be vain. In Chinese we say 好貪靚, so you have this problem, right? But it's so much more than that. Like when I was in the throes, when I was in, those teenage years, my hair was so thin, I was so bony, I knew I did not look good, and to the extent that I would always try to hide my body. Like you would never catch me with something sleeveless, you'd never catch me in something V-necked. I would avoid people, I'd avoid being photographed, I'd avoid parties. So, obviously if it's a vanity thing, like it wouldn't manifest like this, right? So in fact, like eating disorders is way more than just a diet or vanity. It's really about, as we mentioned just now, trying to control your life. And this desire for control stems from insecurities deep inside, right? And the problem with eating disorders is it changes your entire personality. It almost hijacks you. Like I remember when I was a kid, prior to all of this, I was so carefree. I was like, kind of a tomboy, and, I didn't give a hoot what people said. I dug up worms in the garden, like I walked around barefoot. But then with this eating disorder, like it changes your interests, it changes your hobbies, it changes your personality. It takes up 99% of your mental thoughts, of your actions. And, it gets you thinking some very irrational thoughts, right? Like sometimes, I was convinced that my self-worth was completely dictated by my size. And if, let's say if I gained weight, I was completely worthless, which in hindsight, it's crazy talk, right? But I firmly believed that in my mind during then, right? And also it made me really distort what other people would say. Like they would say like, oh, Yen, you look healthy. And in my mind, I'd be like, oh my God, she secretly thinks I'm fat, right? And all these irrational things, they're actually your eating disorder taking control of your life, right? So it's not just an issue of vanity, right? And on the same note, it doesn't just affect girls, right? Because across the gender spectrum, like that sense of control and stability gives a lot of peace and comfort, even though it might be a false sense of peace and comfort. So of course, it can easily just affect men. And with the proliferation of social media and, like bodybuilding, fitness accounts, like a lot of male athletes and bodybuilders have the same kind of mentality, right? It's all about the mentality. It's not necessarily just about the physical presentation. And a last myth that I'd like to bust is a lot of times people look at So the three most common eating disorders is anorexia, which tends to be associated with slim build, like losing weight, and then binge eating, which tends to be associated with weight gain, and then bulimia, which is kind of a mix between the two, right? You would binge and then you would try to compensate. So people would think of like, oh, anorexia and binge eating are completely different. One is so admirable, it's the discipline, and then one is a loss of control, right? But it's actually not. They're actually two sides of the same coin. It stems from the same mentality of, even people with anorexia, it's all about not having control over yourself, right? I remember there's one time in college when my mom came to visit and we went out for breakfast. She placed a glass of orange juice in front of me on the breakfast table and told me to take a sip. And I just could not bring myself to do it. I started trembling, I started sobbing, I just could not, right? And if I was truly in control of myself, I could tell myself to have one sip, it wouldn't kill me, just do it, right? But evidently I wasn't, right? So anorexia is just about the same sense of loss of control as binge eating is over food. It's just a different manifestation. You cannot control your drive for over exercising. You cannot control your drive to diet, right? So it's really about that mentality of losing control. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand about eating disorders at the present moment.
Thank you both for bashing and crushing those myths. It was thoroughly very fun. Thank you. And I just really wanted to emphasize a few points that both of you brought up, which is that there really is no cookie cutter approach to health. And what health looks like, what an illness could manifest as, can also look very different from person to person. And I definitely think that the message of you can't see an eating disorder, and also you can't see whether a person is recovered or whatever that means for that person, either, in terms of, for example, someone can have gained weight again, or looks healthier conventionally, but can still be struggling emotionally. So I think both of you really emphasized and brought up that point, and I really appreciate you bringing that to the forefront. Also, just I think both of your stories really just makes me think about how we can invite our audience too to think about how to take a curious approach to what their definitions of health is, what definitions of health are, and what makes you well, what brings you wellness. So I think both of you opened a door for everyone to consider, hey, maybe there are different ways to look at health and well-being. So thank you for that as well. And now we're kind of wrapping up. So let's get to a question that I'm really excited to ask both of you, which is, what have you both learned from this experience, and what do you love most about yourself today? So why don't we go with Yen first?
So, first and foremost, what I learned is I'm a very different person now from the Yen, I guess, from 10, 20 years ago. I have to say, back then, I really didn't have a self-identity. So I looked at, okay, externally, what did society think was the definition of successful, right? So what does it mean to be successful as a person? And I was like, oh, like to have the best grades, to be admired by people, to have money, status, beauty, to be slim, right? But nowadays, like I realize that doesn't necessarily bring you happiness, not for everyone at least. And blindly following it can be very hurtful to your health. And as Steph said, something else I realized is true health is not just the physical behaviors, it's actually the mindset, right? So your habits need to be flexible. You need to be in touch with what your body needs. So, let's say if I force myself to go to the gym even when I'm dead tired, right? And if I don't, then I get into a fit. And like, is that truly healthy? Like, yeah, I'm going to the gym, it's exercise, but to the extent that it feels like a compulsion, that's actually not actually health, right? That's very much still a disorder. And with that, I now realize that a lot of the illnesses and burdens that people carry, they're invisible to the eye, right? Like it's easy to see someone's arm in a sling and be like, oh, we need to be kind to that person and help them. But a lot of times mental illness is invisible, and we learn to hide it so well. So in general, I've definitely become a much kinder and more empathetic person. especially when people seem, mean or aggressive or selfish. Like looking back, like I'm sure I came across during, the depths of my eating disorder as being selfish and moody. I snapped at people when they made comments about my weight, but in all honesty, like at that time, I was really struggling with myself and fighting myself every day, right? So, I'm still a work in progress. Sometimes I still, see someone, I'm just like, I really dislike that person. But, I'll always try and make a conscious decision and remind myself to be more understanding, to be more sensitive, because people might be fighting battles that we know nothing about, right? So cut some slack. I try to remind myself at least.
Thank you, Yen. Go right on ahead, Bea.
So for me, I think the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things that I've learned to love and appreciate is that I have a lot of resilience on my own, like so much more than I previously thought. I remember a few years ago when I said, yeah, I'm definitely recovered, was when I was studying an intense diploma at work, working full time, and my long-term relationship with someone who was pivotal in my recovery ended. I thought if anything's going to make me relapse, this is, but it didn't. And then I was like, I've got this on my own, I've done all the work, I've got the right things in place that help me. I just need to trust myself and know that, yeah, I've got this going on forward. So I think that was a pretty awesome feeling. I think I've learned as well just to really be patient and understand it's not a linear process. It might be times where you take a few steps back, but then you do keep going and you go a few steps forward. I think you have to be willing to be patient and try different things and be flexible. If one counselor doesn't help, that doesn't mean that others won't. I've also learned that, there's so much I can love in life just beyond what my eating disorder convinced me, which was about body and appearance. Like I found so much meaning in my work as a teacher. I love helping and developing people, and that's got absolutely nothing to do with what I look like. And one of the biggest comments that I do get at my work is my passion and dedication for helping my students. And I'm always trying to pick up new skills, develop myself, and enjoy learning as a lifelong process. So I think that's really relevant to recovering as well. It is just really a lifelong journey and just improving yourself all the time. And while I don't think anyone would want to go through this, I do think that this has been a gift to me. Like I can't go back and change what happened, but I can kind of reframe how I view the situation. And I choose to look at the brighter side or the other side of the coin. Having this, it's given me a lot of empathy, a lot of desire to help other people going through eating issues or other mental health conditions. And it shaped my kind of long-term goal of becoming a counselor. So this year I'm going to start a master's at Hong Kong U, and I hope to be able to help other people out there and just show them so many people have been able to recover and they absolutely can as well.
Wow. Thank you to both of you for sharing. And, something that I thought of when you were sharing those lessons that you learned and where you are today in recovery makes me think that, both of you have walked on a path that you might not have taken had you not experienced an eating disorder. And that path gives you kind of a little bit more of an idea of how to lead someone else if they should be going through something difficult. It opens up a part of your heart to be empathetic towards others that you might not have previously taken. So that's a really beautiful experience you had. And the place you are in recovery as well. The resilience that you're showing today is really inspiring and hope-giving. So thank you to both of you today for being here and for sharing. And I wish we had time for questions. We unfortunately don't. Our discussion is has been very, very fruitful, thankfully. So I think, we do probably have to end now so that people can move on to their next session. But before we do that, I'm going to just share with everyone that if you haven't already, please follow our More Than a Label Instagram. Today's conversation, as you know, is brought to you by More Than a Label, which is Mind HK's campaign that aims to destigmatize conversations about mental health through sharing stories of lived experience like Yen and Bea have beautifully done today. So go ahead, and if you want to see more stories, to hear more stories, very inspiring and hope-giving stories, please follow More Than a Label HK on Instagram and enjoy. And our book, which is a collection of mental health stories from a diverse group of Hong Kong of people in the Hong Kong community, is now on sale at Bookazine as well for $120. So please go ahead and take a look at that as well if you pass by. And all proceeds go back to supporting our campaign. So yeah, in the chat, you should see, yes, there should be a list of resources and, all the resources that we have on the Mind website. So please take a look if you'd like. Thank you so much, everyone. It was lovely to have all of you here to share this wonderful space.